What if I told you one of America's greatest victories in World War II wasn't won with bullets? It was won with deception. No massive tank battles, no heroic last stand, just a small group of soldiers who convinced Hitler's army that thousands of American troops were standing where no army existed. This is the unbelievable true story of the Ghost Army. Spring 1944. Europe was still burning. The Allied forces had landed in Normandy, but the war was far from over. Every mile forward came at a terrible cost. German defenses were strong. One wrong move could mean thousands of American lives lost. Military commanders knew they needed something different. Not another division, not another weapon, a completely different way of fighting. The U.S. Army secretly created a unit unlike any other. It was called the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops, but history remembers them by another name, the Ghost Army. Only about 1,100 men served in this unit, yet they were expected to fool an enemy of millions. Their mission wasn't to destroy German forces. Their mission was to make the Germans believe things that simply weren't true. The men who joined this unit weren't ordinary soldiers. Many had studied art before the war. Some were painters, some were architects, others were graphic designers, actors, engineers, or advertising experts. In civilian life, they created beautiful things. Now, they would create illusions powerful enough to change the course of a war. Their first secret weapon looked ridiculous. Huge inflatable Sherman tanks, made entirely from rubber. They could be folded into the back of a truck. Within minutes, a handful of soldiers could inflate an entire armored division. From the sky, German reconnaissance pilots couldn't tell the difference. To them, the fake tanks looked completely real. But tanks alone couldn't fool the enemy. A battlefield has sounds, engines roaring, tracks grinding, soldiers marching. So the Ghost Army created those sounds too. Massive loudspeakers were mounted on trucks. Special sound engineers mixed recordings of real American armored divisions. When the speakers were switched on, the sounds carried for miles. German troops listening in the distance believed thousands of vehicles were moving towards them. In reality, only a few trucks were hidden in the trees. Then came radio deception. Every military unit had its own communication style. The Ghost Army studied them carefully. Radio operators copied every habit, every signal, every pause, every code. German intelligence intercepted the messages. Everything sounded authentic. The enemy confidently reported the arrival of American divisions that never existed. The deception became even more convincing. The soldiers wore fake patches. They placed fake road signs. They drove military vehicles through villages where enemy spies might be watching. Some even visited local cafes, talking loudly about attacks that would never happen. Every conversation, every movement, every detail was part of the performance. One of their most dangerous missions came near the Rhine River in 1945. The Allies planned to cross into Germany. If the Germans guessed the correct crossing point, the attack could become a disaster. So the Ghost Army went to work. Inflatable tanks appeared. Fake artillery positions covered the fields. Military trucks drove in circles to create clouds of dust. The loudspeakers played endless sounds of engines and construction. Radio operators filled the air with fake communications. Everything suggested one thing: a massive American assault was coming, exactly where the Allies had no intention of attacking. German commanders believed it. Artillery was moved, troops were repositioned, defenses were strengthened, in the wrong place. While they waited for an attack that never came, the real American forces crossed the Rhine somewhere else. The crossing faced far less resistance. Thousands of lives may have been saved, because the enemy had been looking in the wrong direction. Mission after mission, the Ghost Army repeated the same impossible trick. Sometimes they stayed only a single night, sometimes several days. As soon as the enemy realized something felt wrong, they disappeared. Then they appeared somewhere else, like ghosts, never staying long enough to be caught. But this work was incredibly dangerous. Unlike frontline divisions, the Ghost Army had very few heavy weapons. If German forces discovered the truth, there would be almost nothing protecting them. Yet they accepted that risk, again and again, because they understood something important. If their deception worked, thousands of other American soldiers would survive. By the end of the war, the Ghost Army had carried out more than 20 successful deception operations. Military historians believe these missions saved thousands, possibly even tens of thousands, of Allied lives. Every German shell fired at a fake tank was one less shell fired at real soldiers.
Every enemy division sent to the wrong location made victory come a little faster. When World War II finally ended, the Ghost Army quietly disappeared. There were no victory parades, no newspaper headlines, no public celebrations. Everything they had done remained classified. The soldiers returned home. They started families, built careers, lived ordinary lives. But they carried an extraordinary secret. For decades, they told almost no one. Years later, the classified documents were finally released. Historians began uncovering the truth. People around the world were amazed. An army made of artists, designers, actors, and engineers had fooled one of the most powerful militaries in history, without firing major battles, without commanding huge armies, using imagination, planning, and courage. Even today, modern militaries continue to study deception. Technology has changed: satellites, drones, artificial intelligence, cyber warfare. But one lesson from the Ghost Army still remains true. If you can control what your enemy believes, you can influence what they choose to do. And sometimes, that can be more powerful than any weapon. The Ghost Army reminds us that bravery isn't always charging into battle. Sometimes, bravery means standing in front of the enemy, armed with nothing but an inflatable tank, and hoping they never discover the truth. Because in war, the greatest victory isn't always won by the strongest army. Sometimes, it's won by the smartest one. And that is why the secret army that fooled Hitler remains one of the most incredible untold stories of World War II.